Thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Gavel with Jason. I'm really excited and honored to bring on my guests, Martin and Karen Suen Cooper. They are out of upstate New York, and they own Mr. P's Punctilious Place Card Company, which is a tongue twister at best. And for those of you who don't know who Martin and Karen are, they're really, really big deals in the fashion industry. I reached out to them on Instagram probably about a month or so ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, because I came across their Punctilious Mr. P's place cards, and I thought they were just fabulous and wonderful. And after I reached out to them, I found out who they were, and that's often the case. Martin has worked, he graduated magna cum laude from Parsons. He was on their board of governors and alumni advisor. He's worked for companies such as Land's End, Belstaff, Burberry, Calvin Klein, Perry Ellis, and others. Him and Karen were inducted or made members of the Council of Fashion Designers of America, and I think that's the first time ever that a husband and wife were made members at the same time.
Yeah.
By Tom Ford to be a founding member of the CFD Black Advisory Board. Karen has worked at or for or with Anne Klein, Barry Keiselstein Cord, Liz Claiborne, Tommy Hilfiger, and founded Suen Cooper Luxury Goods, which specialized in handbags. She's also a member, like we talked about, of the CFDA. She graduated from Parsons as well. She's been a guest speaker there. She's a guest critic at the Pratt Institute, helping students hone their fine art jewelry making techniques. She's a member of the PTA, member of the Success Academy, docent at the OMI International Arts Center, and they have created this interesting company called Mr. P's Punctilious Place Card Company. And that's what brought me to them and then to me. And so, Martin, thanks for joining us. I know Karen will step in just a minute. But not real quickly, tell us, and we'll start with you since you're here. When Karen comes in, we'll get her backstory. What led you to be involved in fashion, and then how did that transition into the Place Card Company?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Jason, for having us. We're thrilled beyond to spend this time with you. For me in my life, fashion really picked me. I was one of those kids that never had to figure out what I wanted to do in life. I was very, very blessed to have a grandmother, my father's mother, who lived next door to us. And she graduated from Pratt Institute in Brooklyn in 1922, a time in America when most women did not have higher levels of education, and certainly a woman of color from the South. And she was, she taught me how to draft patterns. She bought me my first sewing machine. She was the one who told me, never trust a ruler, always trust your eye, because there's not one single straight line on the human body. And of course, today as a, working professional, those, words I use every single day in the work that I do, whether it's, being a designer or, hello, Karen.
Everyone.
For me, living, oh, there you go. Thank you. For me, living a visually rich life is something that has always been important.
Absolutely. So, Karen, thanks for joining us. I know how life is and things get distracting a little sometimes. I asked Martin to tell us how his path to fashion, what inspired him to be involved in fashion and what led to Mr. P's. Why don't you share with us your story, how you got in, what interested you in fashion, and then starting the Place Card Company?
Well, I would have to say, thank you so much for having us before I begin.
Absolutely.
It is nice to join you here today and your wonderful audience. And so to answer your question, gosh, this is taking me back a bunch of years. I think as a teenager, well, let me say this. As a child, when there were only 3 channels, if you remember, any of you out there remember life before digital streaming, life before cable, there were 3 channels. And what was interesting in those days is that I grew up on the MGM musicals. And that was my portal as a child into a fantastic world that was quite different than the world I lived in, which was essentially, I grew up in the suburbs, you know, like any other child growing up in the 70s, watching Brady Bunch, you know, the after Schoolhouse Rock. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, but then these magnificent MGM studio musicals would come out. Gosh, there were so many. Like some of my favorites is like Gigi and My Fair Lady. These were like Cecil Beaton, or in Britain they would call him Cecil Beaton, right? And so these costume designers and the set designers. And when I was quite young, it was just this magical portal of beautiful colors and shapes and things like that. And then as a teenager, you have to actually leave your house to look for information, to find the magazines, to find the books, to go to the museums. So I grew up in a time where you had to work for your information. And so all of this, being in a suburb, I was in northern Jersey in Bergen County, which is very close to New York City.
Mm-hmm.
New York City for me was just this incredible, now we're fast forward. I was, if you can't tell, an ex-punk rocker and
Okay, so here's a real story. So Karen used to work at Nell's nightclub in New York City. Nell's was like the legendary nightclub. It was the place to be.
It took over where Studio 54 left off.
Really?
And, yeah, it was kind of, okay, so then it was about...
Don't let the pearls fool you. Okay.
It was about androgyny. It was, you know, the punk movement was moving through New York City in the 80s. So it was a time of mohawks. I didn't do a mohawk, but I did have a very androgynous, like very short, if anyone is out there knows Tina Chow, she had like a man's barbered haircut. But it was interesting. It was a time of, you know, just living through what was happening, the zeitgeist of the time. Like for instance, today the young people are fluid. Back then we were just happy to, you know, connect, let's say. It was about, you know, sexual liberation in those days and about the identity of coming out of post-feminism. And so punk rock was like anti-establishment. And if you were a cool young kid, you were wearing black and really kind of tough clothes. This kind of brings in all of like the whole Madonna influence. But the underpinning to all of this kind of zeitgeist was always my love of haute couture. You know, I think I got my first Vogue. It was Vogue. It was the whole Condé Nast brand between Connoisseur, Vogue, Women's Wear Daily, or W. If you weren't in fashion, it was W. These, the media, the magazines really brought an incredible, fantastic world that an average kid from the, you know, a lovely suburb, you know, you're talking about people, the jet set, the beautiful people.
Right.
You know, this is like before Crazy Rich Asians, you know, that whole, and I love that series by Kevin Kwan. But what it is, I think for me was being Asian, and generally wherever I went, I was the only Asian person. So there was a sense of like not being blonde, that you feel like you're the other. This is part of the American, you know, in the days that I was growing up. And so growing up and I was an egghead. I was, I got all the really good grades. I have like trophies somewhere in my mother's house where I was student of the year and National Honor Society. And so that makes a girl kind of like out of the center when you're just academically, doing well. So there were so many things about who I am that was not mainstream, that connecting to New York City was just like the most amazing thing, because you go to New York City, everybody is everything else. And in the 80s, the yen was hot. So if you had an Asian face, people thought you were Japanese, and the red carpet was rolled out wherever you went. It was interesting. So the thing about fashion for me is, I think if you speak in today's term, manifesting everything that you imagine life to be. Like one of my favorites is Auntie Mame. And we just recently screened it with a bunch of our friends and their children. And Auntie Mame was made in 1958. If anyone's familiar with it, the fashion, the interiors, it's
amazing.
What is 58? Let me do math.
Rosalind Russell.
It's like almost 60 years ago,
Yeah.
The interiors are still amazing to look at. I haven't seen it in a few decades, but like I would look at the scenes and see all these beautiful things that are on the set that I didn't see 30 years ago.
Right.
Her personality really carries the whole film, but like you look at her, how she dressed, there was an incredible amount of beading and cigarette holders, ginormous layered bracelets.
Right.
I love that her hair changed with every interior. I mean, like, I don't know how you grew up, but I didn't know anyone like her growing up. And so I think she's an inspiration for anyone who's like, feels like they're in the matrix of the suburban reality construct. And you're like, there's something more. So in a way, if Neo was searching for Lawrence Fishburne's character, oh my God,
yeah, for the Matrix, but yeah,
the Matrix.
It'll come back to me.
Yeah.
So this is the other part. It comes with the grays. Your brain cells go out with the grays, right? It'll come back. Okay.
Right.
Would you please find it?
Yeah, I will.
So if I was Neo, then my guide would be Auntie Mame, because she is like this. She was my guide to like. Her whole world was about inclusivity. Like she had the first scene, she's in a dinner party, and there's like all of these people. When I was a child, they didn't understand what there were different religious leaders by the dress of their costumes. There were writers and like psychiatrists and like just all of the notable people of the day from every single field, from academia to like bohemian artists. So the scene with the cocktail scene is, what's his name?
Morpheus.
That's it. So
sorry.
I used to do this better, but my Morpheus would be Auntie Mame. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
That's amazing stuff. And I think most artists and fashion designers are artists, and you guys are both artists in many ways. I think there's a commonality of punk rock there. I've heard that from many, many artists and designer friends over the years. The woman who works with me, Amy, was definitely into punk rock when she was younger. Right. And the siren call of New York City at that time, I lived in Somerset in the late 80s when I was in high school. And I would cut school and take the train from New Brunswick to the city for the day, back before it was cleaned up.
Yeah, it was a mess.
16 years old, 15, 16 years old, wandering the streets of New York City for a day. It was awesome.
Okay, wait. Were you in the East Village, or were you in Alphabet City, or were you in like the Greenwich Village when you would go to the city?
I couldn't even tell you. I was so young and green and only did it a few times, but it was just so awesome to just be in that buzz, that electricity that there's no other place in the world like. Contemporary,
like Basquiat was still alive when I was, hanging out. Well, here's the interesting thing. Thank you for sharing this because I didn't want to quite say it, but I was like 14, 15, and 16. And there, because of the proximity of my town, there were buses that kind of leave every hour to go into city. So there was a lot of people commuted, right? And so I'm raising a child. He's 10 or 11. The idea of him going to New York City, and he's a city kid, he grew up there, by himself without a grown-up. Like I literally, I planned these escapes. Like I would go, then I would hit, if I would do uptown, I would go to the Met, I would go to the MoMA, I would go to Guggenheim, but I always went downtown.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that my parents let me go.
Because they didn't know. They didn't know.
Mine didn't.
I mean, I know that they knew that you went into the city, but did they know the agenda?
Well, I mean, I wasn't like dealing in drugs or anything like that. I was trying to, my drug were the museums.
Yeah.
No joke. I love the museums.
Yeah.
So
my parents didn't know. My mom found out years later she about had a heart attack. And that's all awesome. But let's jump kind of what we plan on talking about today, because we could talk about New York City stories for days, I'm sure.
Right.
So you guys have Mr. P's, but you have this really interesting thing called the joy economy, which is such an interesting concept. And I was wondering if you could share what is the joy economy? What is that whole idea and purpose, and what do you plan on hope to do with the idea of the joy economy?
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
And real quick, I want to thank, there's a lot of people watching us: Ben, Deb, Rick, John, Stuart, Steve, a bunch of others. If anybody watching has questions for Karen or Martin or myself, please go ahead and ask them in the comments, and we'll get to them as soon as we can. But as we're going along here, tell us about the joy economy.
Okay. So, as we were chatting before, depending on what generation you grew up in, I feel like our directive from our parents were like, nose to the grindstone, find a job to keep a house. And if you're a square hole, then I feel like we were raised in a time when we were asked to fit into slots, right? And I think the main directive was survival, get a job, get a good paying job, steady paying job. I think that was kind of like the message. And that's the, a parent's worry. There wasn't this I feel like it's so interesting today. The kids are starting off with find your passion, work at your passion. That wasn't the message that we got. So we got this so for me to go into fashion was an absolute breakout of well, I'm doing everything you're telling me not to, right? And in Martin's case, his whole family, they're basically in medicine or banking, basically. And so the idea that, Mr. Cooper's son is going to be an artist was so, in the time that you were born. Not so much today. I feel like the mainstream today is much more broader and fluid. So anyways, so here we are, we break out from the molds that were set for us. And we realized that there was the campaign we were going to do one year, that I'm not starving, that going into this unknown to our parents actually brought us to every continent in terms of work, except for Antarctica. But we traveled because we were in fashion. We saw the world because we were in fashion. We went to all the beautiful museums around the world because of our work. So we did this thing that our parents weren't exactly sure what it was. So what was the guiding principle, right? For us, we were living the joy economy as young breakout punk rockers back in the day, because we were following an inner voice about what made us happy. Wouldn't you say the same of you?
Yeah.
And so fast forward, we're going through the kind of, I think in American fashion through the 80s, 90s, and the early 2000s, it was right before, I think 9/11 and 2001 kind of like really shocked the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
But there was like, I am probably at this point 23 years old. I'm flying business class. I'm being picked up by Daimlers, like in Hong Kong. I mean, this is how you traveled in fashion back in the 90s.
Right.
And they would.
Those days are gone now.
Those days are gone. And
it was an amazing life.
It was an amazing life. And at that point,
you don't even realize it because you don't know any different.
Until you realize like technology has changed how people travel and move. But so anyways, we primarily worked for large corporations. And there are a lot of, how do you describe it, rules and things about being in a corporate environment that they're good disciplines. They're not, it's not always about joy. It's always about money, right? So coming through this and coming out of this, so a thing that really marked this birth of the joy economy, or at least having a name for what we have always done, was the birth of our child, when I started looking at the broken fashion system, and realizing that like I'm at this point, I think I had PAX at 41, and I tried to go back to work around like 44, 45. And the fashion system was not in those days about, how do you describe this? Gosh, there's so many things I can say about the fashion world, which I think the pandemic is actually really changing and shifting all industries. So fast forward, we get this new president in 2016 that really shook up how we wanted to live our lives. And there's a lot of world things going on about sustainability, climate emergencies, and how the fashion industry plays into all of that. So what we were, really kind of thinking about, tossing, is like, how do you be a creative person? And for anyone who actually is a maker at heart, we know that when we're making, there's like a channel that you energetically enter into where like the world does not exist. For instance, if you're sitting down and you're drawing, or you're sitting at your potter's wheel, or you're blowing glass, you have to really block out the world and everything else and just be very present with your whatever you're making. So there's a lot of study about happiness and joy, and they call that space, that mental space, flow, So I started thinking about like, all right, I'm 40 something, and I'm not dying anytime soon, I hope. Like, and then another thing happens. Our very good friend, Dr. Max Gomez, he's the medical correspondent for CBS. He co-authored a book right around 2015. And we're sitting at the 92nd Street Y, where a lot of people, debut ideas and whatnot. And Maurice Dubois is interviewing him, and he says into the dark audience, you sitting here in the theater, you are going to live into 100, 110, 120, and then he's saying like the person who's going to live to 150 is already born. His book is called Cells Are the New Cure. It's about a shift of big pharma into using extracting T cells and other things that are in your body. Your cells are going to be the new medicine. So all of these things kind of swimming around in our heads. We're thinking, well, the world was in an agrarian economy for, I don't know, several thousand years. And then fast forward, we go into the industrial economy. The industrial economy is basically gives rise to the green economy, which is to fix all the problems of the industrial economy. So then I'm thinking to myself, when you have gone through this arc of shift and change, what happens next? What happens when you have to live 120 years? That's like having 2 lifetimes. Are you going to go and work in a place that you don't like? Are you going to be somebody who you're not? Like, that's like that's living hell, isn't it? Like being
Right.
something that you're not. And so that, I think that was an incredible pivotal point. I turned to Martin, I said, we can live to about 80 years old. We can't make it. We don't have enough money to get to 100, 110, like, where's this money coming from, So it became incumbent upon us to really rethink, well, we know we have to work because we have like a few dollars that might take us to our 80s. And that's how we were asked to plan when I was in my, early 20s, right? The 401k and all of that stuff. So what happens when you get an extra lifetime? How do you live if I get extra 30 years to live, how do you live that, right? And so we realized if you messed up the whole world with the industrial economy and you fix it with the green economy, what's next? It only is natural that it becomes a joy economy. It is a way of conducting your businesses with joy as the compass. And that's why we started Mr. P. It all kind of came together. Because what's one of the happiest times in your day? When you're getting together with all your friends, right? Over a meal. We've been doing it over the fire in a cave for thousands of years. It's part of our evolutionary biology, that it is the ability to socialize that allows you to, so we're wired for you to succeed as a species on Earth. It is the socializing process that makes the humans most successful these days. And so and then we were also thinking, well, if you get into this area of entertaining and gathering, it's, you look across the table, you'll see you're supporting how many industries, the textile industry, the designers, the weavers. You're supporting farmers because of the food, the vintners because of the drink, the silversmiths, the glass blowers. And it all started to dawn on us that every time we gather, we are actually supporting so many artists, so many makers, and so many industries. And so this is, for us, the joy economy centers on fundamentally that which brings you joy, but specifically, it's about the goodness of gathering and getting people together. All the endorphins and all of the feel-good hormones, the serotonin and all of these things. So, and I'm saying all of the way I'm speaking has a lot to do with raising a child, of like understanding all of these biological processes on how to raise a healthy child. Because part of the joy economy to us is also, what do we leave to our next generation?
That's great.
Right? And also too, the energy of joy. What brings me joy ripples forth to you, that it interests you enough that you buy it and then you share it with people. So in essence, the commodity of everything that we can touch and hold is about sparking joy. So if you give a present to someone, you've taken that joy from the maker who made it to the person who's receiving the gift, or the people who are gathering around your hearth and fire. And it changes how you make business decisions. When we were younger, it was all about greed and money, right? Like the 80s, remember? It was all about like more money, more money, more money. But I think like if you start recalibrating, like, well, what's going to bring me joy today, and how do I pass that joy forward? It changes how you do things. And so in a nutshell, joy economy is the purpose and pleasure of commerce.
Wow, I love that last line, the purpose of commerce. That's great. So Martin, Karen's kind of monopolized a little bit here. She talks several times about gathering.
Welcome to my life.
Welcome to every husband's life. I think we're all very have similar things. But Karen talked about gatherings and getting together with friends and sharing meals and things like that, which I know is kind of what led you to the place card company, because you got really bored of the white place cards that were just anywhere and everywhere. So Martin, tell us a little bit about the place card company, and how did you come up with Mr. P's Punctilious Place Card Company? I think it's the name is so fascinating, and you cannot forget it once you said it, once you read it. So
it's actually the Punctilious Mr. piece. There's a slight in the title.
Oh,
yeah.
Don't worry. So so we love entertaining here at Bello, and so we call our home Bello. It's a contraction of big and yellow, because everyone in the hamlet knows our house as the big yellow house. And we just absolutely adore entertaining. And so one day I'm sitting in the black dining room, which is right behind me, or behind us. I don't know if you guys can see in there, kind of in there. And when it's done up, and at night, and the candles are going, it is a transformative room. And so I'm sitting in there, and it's all completely, lined in antique mirror. It's an amazing space. And we always use place cards. And so, the roles that we divided, Karen does all of the cooking because she is from a restaurant family. Pax and I set the table. Pax used to write out the names for.
He's been doing it since he was 3.
For the place. And so I'm sitting in this space, and everyone's around the table, and I'm just looking at the backs of everyone's cards, and I see white card, white card, white card, white card, white card, white card, right? And I said, well, there's a disconnect. Why am I sitting in this beautiful, emotive space, but I'm looking at the backs of blank white place cards? Of course, they're seeing their names. But I said, why can't we use a highly curated image that helps to set the theater of the table for that meal? So if you're feeling chinoiserie, then, there could be a chinoiserie motif on the back of the card. Or if you're feeling, now for fall, beautiful, fiery pheasants, or, what have you. And so I went to Karen and I said, I have an idea. And we're going to start a place card company. And you're like, oh my God, because number one, there's no innovation in the space.
Right.
So we felt that literally, what is a place card? It is a white card, or what sometimes they call a tinted white card, folded. Or the white cards or the place cards that were in the market were just not right for us or our home. And we thought there was a tremendous white space for us to go after. And but what made it interesting was that Karen said it just can't be around the place card. And that's when she started formulating the concept of the joy economy.
Right. So we're in separate spheres, and I've been trying to figure out, like, on my side, what is it? What are we trying to do with our lives? And when he said place cards, I said, oh my goodness. It fits into this idea of the joy economy, because I had the name in my head, but I didn't quite understand how it was going to look. And then when he said place cards, and I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to create a company based on one of the favorite times of our day.
Gathering.
Right. And it's something that we draw a lot of wonderful energy from our friends. And
there's no better way to honor your guest than have a named place for them at your table.
Right.
And for us, place cards are never formal. It is a terrific gesture that we are choosing, in the 24 hours that we have in a day, we are choosing to spend time with each other. Right. Like today, Jason, being on your show, is a choice that we all make. Right. And so there is no better way to honor and celebrate our friendship than having a name place for our guest at our table.
Oh, that's such a beautiful thought and idea. And I think it's something that it's so simple and yet so powerful and impactful that I applaud you for starting the company and doing all the things that you're doing. And I hope that it's immensely successful and popular and spreads across the world for you. I just think, and the designs, the imagery that you all have, the Halloween things you have going on right now, the seasonal pieces, the Thanksgiving images, they're just so beautiful as well. Like you said, if you surround yourself with beautiful antiques in this beautiful antique home, and I think that's going to take us to our final little segment here. Just a week or so ago, you were featured in Elle Decor magazine.
Yeah.
Which is it's an interesting little story behind that. When I asked Martin and Karen to be on the show, they said they'd love to, but they can't do it until after this magazine hits because they couldn't show the interior of their house anywhere until the magazine dropped. And for those of you curious, there's a link to it right there in the comments I just posted. It's such a neat article. I read it online a couple of times. The picture of you outside with your son Pax on the swing, I think is just beautiful.
Thank you.
I love that you buy things and mentioned and made sure that Stair Gallery Auction House was mentioned in the article.
Yes.
So selfishly speaking, I think auctions are the best place to buy the most interesting and beautiful things in the world.
Agreed.
They are. They are.
So tell us a little bit about the restoration of the house and then buying. I know we only have, we don't want to go for days on this. I know that we could, but then a little bit about what do you like? How do you decide on something to add to that magnificent interior space that you have?
So in a nutshell, 15 years ago, we bought a 1790s farmhouse in Old Chatham, New York, which is in Columbia County, upstate New York. And it's a historic home. What was interesting about it was when we bought the house and we were walking through the house, a home has a soul, and kind of additionally, it has a voice. And we the voice that we heard as we were walking through the house was like, help me, and the house, literally the house spoke to us. The house looked nothing like what was featured in Elle Decor. We wanted to reimagine the home in a way in which we thought that it should have always been that way, but wasn't. So, for example, there were no crown moldings. We started, putting in crown moldings, etc. And we worked with an amazing architect who specialized in historic preservation and restoration. And so she was the one who kind of like walked us through the house and said, how things got moved over a period of time. Like, for example, we're in the salon now, and the door, I don't know if you guys can see, but that's the door right there. Mm-hmm. And it's a door that we never used. That's the front door. We never use it, but it was this tiny little farmhouse door. I'm 6'2", so I would have to kind of like, go underneath it. And that was very, it's really a farmhouse. So we decided that we wanted to reimagine the house. And
a storied past with a connection to Europe. Because around the time we were designing everything, Martin's job with Burberry brought us to London. And it was, as in the article, it was the cradle of this design period. And so we were able to go outside and look at the different neighborhoods and also the manor homes in London to, like, for instance, this door is really, you would see it very commonly in, in the houses in London. The way the molding, the size, the shape, and all of this stuff. We had something, when we came, it was like a screen door that was boarded up with plywood painted hunter green. It was kind of horrible, yeah. And then we wanted it to have more of a there's a character that you're writing about, you know.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to finish a thought.
Yeah.
So Kate helped us kind of put the house back together again. So for example, they had moved the fireplace surrounds from the federal part of the house into the later Italianate part of the house. So she said, we got to put everything back where it was. The reason why I was showing you the door was that it's a classic federal center hall home. And so you would have come in through that front door and you would have gone up the stairs to go upstairs. At some point in the history of the house, they cut the stairs and moved that staircase to the back of the house.
As a load-bearing wall.
Which was a load-bearing wall. So some of the things.
Is that important?
So some of the things that we encountered was, now we're living in London. Kate, our architect, called and said, hey, I'm, drawing up the plans. The salon is not making sense mathematically. And I think we have good news to share with you. So the ceiling here in this room was completely bowed, like sagged. And so she was saying historically in the past, what would happen was if a ceiling started to sag, they would literally just put another ceiling underneath it. And so she's thinking that ceiling 1 is pushing through ceiling 2. And the good news is that there would be recapturable ceiling height to be had. And so she's thinking, because the numbers weren't making sense, she's thinking like maybe 8 inches of recapturable ceiling height.
That's huge.
So for an old home, certainly a federal house, that's a big deal. And because I can stand and basically touch the ceiling here in this room. And so she said, do I have your permission just to like cut a hole and know instantly, right? So the next week, we're back on our call with Kate. She's like, I don't have good news. The second floor is just falling in. And so in this room, we've run steel I-beams in the ceiling. The house will be here for another 200 years. With what we've done with the home. But, kind of segueing into how we conceptualize the home, we conceptualize the 3 main rooms downstairs to mark the passing of time through the day. And so the yellow room, which is our living room.
On the east side of the house.
So the house faces due north. And so the living room, the yellow room faces east, so the sun comes up there. The room that we're in now is the salon, which was very much inspired by, you can't see it because the mantle is facing us, but we have these 2 beautiful Greek vases that are on the mantle, red clay vases. And those 2 vases were the jumping off point for the wallpaper here. And so we're in this kind of like clay terracotta room with accents of strong blacks. And then the room behind us is the dining room, and that is west, which shows, it lights up pretty much in the afternoon because the sun falls through that room, and that room represents night. And so as Karen was alluding, when we were living in London, I was writing a book about a 19th century master mystic who lived in our neighborhood in Chelsea in London. And so we were, I was, and Karen for that matter, very much immersed in the world of the 19th century. And the great thing about it was when Kate would, present a question for us, all we had to do was just walk around the neighborhood in London and we could see how to solve that problem.
Right.
And that was a really kind of magical time for us. But
it was really great.
But we love antiques. And so the house is filled with antiques. Nothing so precious or priceless You know, we've had, when we moved back from London, our son was just under a year old. So, you know, for those out there who say, well, you know, I can never have antiques because I have kids in the house, that is not the case.
Right.
They understand antiques. Pax has grown up at Stair Galleries in
yes.
Hudson.
Yes.
He comes to the auction with us. It is truly one of the delights that we have is to buy at auction. And we truly believe that, you know, number one, we are helping the environment by repurposing and giving, you know, I can't even say a second life to things, because these objects and pieces of furniture may have had 5 or 6 different owners prior to us, but it's very much a karmic thing for us that, you know, if we win something in auction, that means that it was meant to be a part of our home here at Bello. If we don't win, it was not meant for us to have that. And a great example of that, which, you know, it's kind of hard to see in the dining room. Sorry, in the dining room. So the chairs we bought first, and the chairs were a part of the way that they arranged it at the auction house. The chairs were a part of a table, and we loved the way that it looked. We loved the whole thing. And so at the auction, we won the chairs, but we lost the table. So we were like, oh my God, what do we do? Like we have 6 years, right? So we had the chairs, and like, how do we match? You know, it was all it was perfect together, but we didn't get it together. And so years later, we ended up finding this beautiful black Maison Jensen table that just beautifully worked. And then, you know, it was meant for us to have that.
Right.
Yeah, I think patience is a virtue when you're buying an auction.
Yeah.
And I love the fact there's so many things you say I've just enjoyed so much. The idea that you bring your son, and there's a lot of people bringing their children and buying an auction. It's a wonderful thing we're seeing. I think there's something really soothing for the soul when you buy things with that idea of not, like I said, a second life, but just a continuation, and enjoying the benefits of that history of that patina and that just, you know, stability that I think is so lacking. And you have pieces from Restoration Hardware in your house, and those are wonderful. But I love that you mix.
Yes.
Because you need comfort, but you want beauty and you want serenity too. I think it really plays well together in your home. Martin and Karen, thank you so much. It's been almost an hour when we talked tonight. Thank you so much for joining us.
We're like wind up toys. We can just talk forever.
I know it's fun to get topics that you enjoy or are passionate about, and as part of your daily life.
Thank you.
To share with other people. So thank you so much for all of that.
Great.
And let me just go ahead and close this out real quick. Thank you all so much for watching. Next week, our guest is going to be Dr. Raymond Doswell. He's Vice President and Curatorial Services at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum here in Kansas City, a good friend of mine. Excited to talk to him about the 100-year anniversary of Negro Leagues Baseball and also about the 30-year anniversary of the museum here in town. If you have any questions for us, we do the Behind the Gavel every Friday and have interesting guests. You can always send us a question at info@kcauctioncompany.com. You can give us a phone call, 816-283-3633. If you have any questions for us, for guests you've seen in previous episodes, questions you want to ask guests in the future, or ideas for guests, we would love to hear them. Martin and Karen, thank you again so much. Appreciate you spending time with me today and our previous conversation. I've had a great time talking with you both times, and look forward to seeing Mr. B's Punctilious place cards around tables I used to eat at in the future.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely. Have a great weekend.